The legendary North Sea monster, the Kraken, has been spotted at the Arctic Research Station. Two strategic nuclear submarines use all their strength but can't defeat it. They have to detonate their nuclear reactors, perishing alongside the monster. Little do they know, this is just the beginning of a nightmare. Not long ago, a group of researchers led by Julia arrived at the Arctic Research Station as planned. They were preparing to collect relevant experimental data using sonar and other equipment. They had just set up the sonar equipment. Julia received a message from her colleagues that a snowstorm was about to hit the area. They hurried to pack up and return to the camp to take shelter temporarily. Just at this point, a Russian strategic nuclear submarine arrived in the Arctic region to carry out a secret patrol mission. Using the equipment on the submarine, they detected significant sonar interference ahead, but knowing that there was a scientific research team nearby, they didn't pay much attention to the situation there. They simply activated their anti-jamming equipment, planning to pass through the area. But they wouldn't expect that the true source of the interference was actually an ancient legendary monster. An accident occurred while Julia and her team were packing up the sonar equipment. Before Julia and her team could react, the ice surface had already bulged and spread out for thousands of meters. Oscar, one of her companions, guessed that they might have met with a rare mega crevasse and needed to leave the area as soon as possible, otherwise, they would have no place to be buried. Upon hearing this, Julia hopped onto Oscar's snowmobile right away, heading toward the camp. But before the two could reach, the crevasse suddenly changed direction, covering them within the area of collapse. Oscar's snowmobile was thrown away and exploded. Julia and Oscar were very lucky to have only sustained injuries, and weren't affected by the explosion, but they had lost their only means of transportation because of this. It was impossible to return to the camp quickly. Before the two could feel disappointed, they realized the situation was far worse than they had anticipated, because during the recent disaster, their camp had also been affected. It was now completely destroyed. The two were left without any protective measures in the Arctic wilderness. They would soon freeze or starve to death. But compared to the situation in the Russian submarine, they were already quite lucky. During the recent terrifying disaster, the nuclear submarine beneath the ice seemed to have met with some sort of attack. The whole submarine was completely out of control. They could clearly feel that a tremendous force was pulling the submarine into the deep sea. The Russian submarine commander realized that the situation was completely beyond his control. At the last second, he sent a distress signal to the Russian Navy headquarters. Then the whole submarine was dragged into the deep sea, its fate unknown. Before long, the Russian Navy headquarters received the distress signal. They took very seriously the power capable of destroying a strategic nuclear submarine. They dispatched another strategic nuclear submarine for rescue right away. Commanded by Ivanov, they headed to the Arctic region, following the locator of the distress signal transmitter. Meanwhile, Julia and her team quickly launched a self-rescue operation. After seeing their camp destroyed, they attempted to contact a nearby offshore drilling platform. Using their only satellite phone, the other party agreed to let the two take shelter on the drilling platform temporarily, but they would have to leave once the snowstorm passed. Even so, Julia was very grateful. This meant they had a chance to survive. But just then, she suddenly noticed a faint red light shimmering in the nearby ice field. She and Oscar cautiously approached. To check, they discovered it was a small signal transmitter. Oscar, having years of experience working in the Arctic, recognized it as a Russian military signal transmitter right away. As the two wondered why there would be a Russian military signal transmitter in such a place, they suddenly saw the ice layer in front of them crack open. Then, a massive submarine emerged from beneath the ice. The two thought it was a rescue sent by the drilling platform, but upon closer inspection, they discovered it bore the insignia of the Russian Navy. It was clearly there for the signal transmitter. Before the two could react, several soldiers rushed down from the submarine and subdued them. Then, Commander Ivanov appeared before them. He looked at the signal transmitter and asked them about the missing submarine. Julia shared everything she knew with Ivanov right away and provided him with some suggestions based on her expertise. After listening, Ivanov guessed that the signal transmitter might have been displaced due to the sudden movement of the ice. He couldn't help but feel annoyed. At this point, Julia suddenly mentioned that while recovering the sonar equipment, they had detected a unique signal that resembled a submarine. Upon hearing this, Ivanov requested that the two take them to the site of their previous scientific exploration. To this, Julia didn't refuse. But she had one condition: they needed the Russian submarine to escort them to the nearby drilling platform for refuge. The platform was conveniently located not far along their route, therefore, Ivanov readily agreed. Julia and Oscar then followed the Russian soldiers into the submarine. They powered up their engines, and swiftly headed toward the exploration site. Little did they know, the giant beast that had caused this disaster hadn't left. It had been drawn to the submarine's presence once again. Ivanov advanced toward the exploration site under Julia's guidance, while also gathering information about the situation. Unbeknownst to them, their actions had led the giant beast closer to the drilling platform. The offshore platform's manager watched the suddenly turbulent sea surface, wondering why such a situation had arisen. In the next second, he saw a scene he would never forget. At this point, the platform manager was completely stunned, standing frozen in place. Some workers chose to turn and run, but they were on an offshore platform, with nowhere to escape. The beast's tentacles spread onto the drilling platform. The steel structure crumpled before the massive tentacles, like a child's toy crushed by the beast. Explosions erupted everywhere. Finally, the whole platform was completely consumed by the beast. The scene was saw by everyone on the Russian submarine. They were filled with astonishment and panic at the appearance of the beast. Russia had controlled the Arctic region for many years, and had conducted many secret patrol missions. No one had ever discovered that a fierce monster lurked here. Ivanov suspected that this beast was responsible for the previous nuclear submarine's disaster, but now wasn't the time to look into where the beast had come from, because the submarine's sensors detected that the beast seemed to have found them. It was now rushing toward the submarine at high speed. Such a sudden change terrified everyone, causing their faces to pale. Ivanov ordered right away to turn the submarine around quickly. Then to escape the area as fast as possible, they needed to flee this sea region. Everyone understood how bad the situation had become, therefore, they pushed the reactor to maximum efficiency, to speed away from the area. But for the beast, their speed was nothing but slow as a turtle. In just a moment, the beast had already arrived near the submarine. Their submarine was about to meet the same fate as their previous companions, sinking into the sea. Ivanov decided to fight the beast to the bitter end. He decisively ordered to attack the beast with torpedoes from the submarine. The crew was already prepared for a fight to the death. They quickly loaded the ammunition. 2 torpedoes hit the deep-sea monster with pinpoint accuracy. Everyone relaxed right away. After all, they were torpedoes. No creature could survive 2 hits. They thus concluded that the monster had been dealt with. But an unexpected event occurred in the next second. The monster was completely unharmed. Commander Ivanov ordered the launch of more powerful torpedoes right away. The crew quickly recovered from their shock. They launched torpedoes again to attack the monster. This time, they all hit with precision as well, and they kicked up even more smoke than before. But no one dared to relax. They had come to a deep realization that the monster couldn't be understood by normal logic. What happened next was as they expected. These 2 torpedoes also failed to cause any damage. Instead, they completely enraged the deep-sea monster. It swung its thick tentacles and struck the nuclear submarine where everyone was located. With just one attack, the submarine suffered a major malfunction. Not only was the power system disabled, but the hull began to leak water. They lost control and crashed into the underwater canyon. Then, without a power system to maintain their position, they began to gradually fall deeper into the canyon. The deep-sea monster clearly had no intention of letting Ivanov and the others go. It moved its massive body right away to pursue them above the underwater canyon. Seeing that the monster was about to attack the submarine again, Commander Ivanov seemed to realize something. He ordered the submarine operators to turn off all radar and sonar systems. With this, the submarine became almost like a piece of metal sinking in the deep sea. What happened next was completely unexpected for everyone. After Ivanov ordered the systems to be shut down, the deep-sea monster suddenly stopped its movements. It seemed as if it could not see the submarine at all. At this point, Ivanov knew he had made the right gamble. Through previous events, Ivanov had discovered that the monster attacked targets that were emitting signals, so he guessed that the monster could only locate its targets through signals, so he ordered his men to turn off the ship's signals in the nick of time. Subsequent events proved that his speculation was totally correct. Now, they just needed to wait for the ship's power system to be restored, and then leave the underwater canyon. to safely escape the pursuit of the deep-sea monster. After much effort, the submarine finally regained power. Then, as planned, they slipped away right under the nose of the deep-sea monster. They narrowly escaped disaster. Ivanov prepared to return right away to report this matter to the Navy headquarters. On the way back, they accidentally detected a special signal. After analysis, they confirmed that this was the distress signal from the previously lost submarine. Clearly, Ivanov and his team happened to arrive near the lost submarine. Then Ivanov tracked the source of the signal and combined it with map information to determine that the lost submarine was located not far away. His plan was to go and conduct a rescue, but others on the submarine raised objections to this, because a long time had passed since the submarine's disaster. Moreover, the cause of all this was still the deep-sea monster. These people believed that all the crew on the submarine had unluckily perished. They thought Ivanov leading them there would be a death sentence. Faced with these doubts, Ivanov had no words to counter them, because he knew as well that the crew on that submarine had most likely all perished. But he believed that these warriors must be brought home. Their bodies should be returned to their homeland. Therefore, Ivanov insisted on rescuing the submarine, but he also took the opinions of the other crew members into account. He didn't send the entire submarine over. Instead, he dispatched a small submersible. As for the main submarine, it remained hidden near the underwater cliff nearby, ready to respond to any emergencies. In addition, Ivanov decided to personally go over to conduct the rescue himself. This way, if something did go wrong, the other crew members could quickly escape. So Ivanov piloted the small submersible to the location of the lost submarine. After completing the docking of the two vessels, Ivanov prepared himself mentally for a long time. He had envisioned the worst-case scenario. After all, this lost submarine looked dilapidated from the outside. The whole seabed was covered with fragments torn apart by the deep-sea monster. But when Ivanov opened the hatch, he was completely stunned by the sight before him. None of the crew members had died. Some had only suffered minor injuries during the initial attack. They had been relying on the remaining oxygen while waiting for their homeland to rescue them. Ivanov was very grateful for his persistence. Later, he learned that after the submarine was attacked, their commander had made a swift decision, ordering everyone to abandon other areas and gather at the front of the submarine. This way, they had avoided the monster's attack. Afterward, they had been waiting for rescue with the limited oxygen. Ivanov followed the plan right away to transfer all of them to the submersible. A new problem arose. He had never expected that there would be so many survivors here. As a result, the submersible's interior couldn't accommodate so many people. They had to evacuate in batches. In such a situation, every extra second spent increased the danger. After a difficult decision, the crew members volunteered to give the first batch of evacuation spots to their injured companions. They would stay behind to wait for further rescue. Ivanov took action right away, boarding the crew members onto the submersible. Once it was full, he piloted the submersible back to the submarine. Before leaving, he left a locator device on the submarine to save time in locating it later. This would help in the search process. Meanwhile, those remaining on the submarine weren't idle. They were about to leave this place, not wanting the Russian military's nuclear submarine technology to fall into the hands of other countries later on, so they decided to start the self-destruct sequence of the submarine. They wanted to prevent the Americans from gaining any advantage. This dangerous task was assigned to a crew member named Anthony. He bravely stepped out of the safe zone and went into the severely damaged control room of the submarine. But what they didn't know was that a new danger was already approaching, because earlier, Ivanov had left the locator device, which emitted only a very faint signal, but it still attracted the deep-sea monster's attention. So, it was now racing toward them at a terrifying speed. If nothing unexpected happened, in a few minutes, everyone would be doomed to drown in the sea. As time passed second by second, Ivanov finally returned the first group of crew members to the submarine. The other crew members began treating their wounds right away to prevent infection. Meanwhile, Ivanov planned to pilot the submersible back to the location of the lost submarine for rescue. Just then, the radar suddenly detected a massive marine creature approaching at high speed. They realized right away that the deep-sea monster was catching up. Ivanov had to abandon the idea of returning, and quickly began to command the submarine to retreat. With prior experience, Ivanov knew they couldn't outrun the monster, so he didn't even think of competing in speed. Ivanov ordered the crew to submerge the submarine right away. They hid in the underwater canyon below. This was a location he had carefully chosen. It could only accommodate one submarine. given the size of the deep-sea monster, it couldn't possibly squeeze in. What happened next was indeed as Ivanov had anticipated. The deep-sea monster couldn't squeeze in at all. It could only rage helplessly above them. Just as Ivanov thought they could wait for the monster to lose patience and leave on its own, and then return to rescue the others, he was horrified to find that although the deep-sea monster had left, it was heading straight for the lost submarine. Ivanov realized something was wrong, but he couldn't stop it. The torpedo weapons on the submarine couldn't inflict any damage on the monster. The only thing he could do now was to inform the other submarine of this unfortunate news, to prepare them mentally for the possibility of sacrifice. But during the call, Ivanov suddenly thought of an idea. Perhaps he could use the sacrifice of his comrades to completely kill the monster. He shared his thoughts with the crew, but he learned that they had already activated the self-destruct system. In that case, they only needed to activate the radar and sonar systems. The deep-sea monster would surely be drawn to it. At that point, they could use the submarine's self-destruct sequence to completely destroy the monster. At this time, the crew was already prepared for sacrifice. They said little more, and silently activated all the radar and sonar systems on the submarine. The deep-sea monster was attracted by the strong signal right away. It approached the lost submarine at an even faster speed. Then, it wrapped its tentacles tightly around the submarine. In the next second, the submarine's self-destruct sequence activated. With the sacrifice of several crew members, the deep-sea monster was finally blown to pieces. Ivanov and the others surfaced in the submarine, falling into a long silence. But what he didn't know was that the sacrifice of his comrades hadn't completely killed the monster. A greater danger was still brewing. The film ends here. According to the name of the movie Kraken, one might think it was some thrilling and intense polar adventure film. After watching, one realizes there are indeed monsters, and they are indeed in the polar region. But the plot is truly a bit hard to describe. Let's talk about the strengths of this movie first. The biggest highlight is definitely the special effects, especially during the appearance of the North Sea Kraken. Those enormous tentacles crushed the drilling platform like it was a toy. The visuals were quite stunning. It made viewers gasp in surprise, but the plot was a bit lacking. At the beginning, the researchers went to the Arctic for a scientific expedition. They had just set up the sonar when a snowstorm hit. Then the ice surface heaved and the camp was gone. This opening was relatively normal, but after the Russian submarine arrived, the plot began to spiral out of control. The submarine was pulled into the deep sea by the monster, then another submarine was dispatched for rescue. In the end, both submarines were nearly destroyed by the monster. Finally, they had to resort to detonating the nuclear reactor to perish together. Isn't this plot direction a bit cliché? Moreover, the monster's design is quite puzzling. It seems to specifically target things that emit signals. If the radar and sonar are turned off, it can't find its target. While this setup gives the protagonists a chance to survive, it's also a bit too simplistic and blunt. It feels like the monster's intelligence doesn't match its size. Additionally, the character's behavioral logic is also a bit hard to grasp. For example, Commander Ivanov, knowing full well that the monster is dangerous, still insists on rescuing the lost submarine. While the desire to bring the soldiers' souls home is noble, he doesn't seem to consider the reality of the situation. He almost put everyone in danger. Then there are the crew members left on the lost submarine, who decided to activate the self-destruct sequence to prevent their technology from falling into foreign hands. This idea is fine, but when they activated the self-destruct sequence, the monster happened to arrive. In the end, they relied on self-destruction to kill the monster. This plot coincidence is a bit absurd. It feels like it was forced to fit the ending. Additionally, the pacing of the film has issues. The setup at the beginning was a bit too long. The monster fighting part in the middle felt rushed. The ending suggests that the monster wasn't completely destroyed, and that a greater danger is still brewing. Is this setting up for a sequel? But with this plot, is there really a need for a sequel? Overall, Kraken is a monster film with decent special effects, but it has many plot holes and logical inconsistencies. If you're just looking for visual stimulation, then you might enjoy it. But if you want to see a logically coherent and exciting movie, then this one might not be suitable for you. If you enjoy my channel, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.